Silhouette Secrets Plus, and I am a Terry Johnson Creates licensed silhouette instructor. Today I'm going to unbox this Curio and explain what comes in the box when you order one. I see a lot of new beginners who are very confused when they open it because it is a little bit different than a Silhouette Cameo. It uses a platform system, so we're just going to open the box, we're going to go through everything, and we're going to get you started. So the first thing that you're going to see in here is you're going to see a plastic bag with your platforms. So I'm just going to take those out. These are the platforms that stack on your base. We're going to set those to the side. Next in the box, you're going to see the Curio base. The base package of a Curio comes with a small Curio base. It is a 6-inch by 8.5-inch base. So when you get the cutting mat, that's what your cutting mat is. The cutting mat is the one with the blue cover on it. We'll go over all of those here together. Next, you're going to have some little bags inside. You're going to have some tools in there along with a CD and a booklet. We'll get to that and explain it here. And then sometimes you might need a little bit of help too. So you're going to have your machine. It's packaged with the styrofoam packing. And it's going to be covered. So we'll set that aside for just a second. And the final thing in your box is this little cardboard. There's little things stuck in it. It's your adapter cord and your USB cord. So we're going to take that out. I'm going to put all of this back in the box and set this box aside. So now you have your Curio machine. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take all of the protective covering off. And you can notice that you have some protective tape on here to keep the machine closed in shipping. So we're going to go ahead and take that off. You're going to open the machine. You're going to also notice that the housing's been taped into place. So you want to go ahead and remove the tape on the housing. And then you just want to double check inside the machine to make sure that there's nothing else in there. Sometimes, especially with the Cameo 3, you'll have some styrofoam packing that's over here on the right hand side. With the Curio, this one doesn't have anything else inside of it. What you're going to notice is that you have a double housing. This is tool 1. It's designated by a red circle on top. And this is tool 2. It's designated by a blue circle on top. This will match up in the software when you plug in the Curio under your send tab. You also have tool storage on either side, so you can store your cutting blade or your stippling blade or embossing tools on the sides of the machine. So I'm just going to open this little baggie of blades, and they fit right down in there. Now, this is not secure for when you're traveling. You want to remove the blades because they will pop out if you tip the machine. The other thing on the Curio is that it has a base that pops out that is for stabilization. I don't use this very often. I can see using it when you're using the large base for the Curio, which does not come with the typical basic package. It is a purchase that you can make afterwards. There's only one project I've used the large base on, and that's when I'm using the large wine caddy that I etch on. So most often, I don't even pull this out. I just leave it tucked in there. So you have your USB cord. That will connect from your Curio to your computer. You're going to plug it in on the right hand side. There's a USB adapter. And then you would plug the USB side into your computer. You also have a power adapter. And this comes in 2 sections. So you're going to insert one section into the other, and you're going to plug the outlet, this into the side of your Curio. And then, as usual, this goes into your wall outlet. In your little bag, which is also where I found the blades, you have a few more things. You have some clips. I'll show you where those go here in a second. You have some fasteners. There are some little tiny plastic fasteners that are made to hold down your materials. And you also have these little black squares, which are used when you are doing an embossing project, a print and embossing project. You also have a disc. You can go ahead and set this aside because the software is really old on this disc. So you can go ahead and just put that aside. You can download the software directly from the Silhouette America website. You also get a code for some free designs. And you have all the other paperwork with the tiny fine print on it. You also get this little manual in it. What I will point out in the manual, it does walk you through all of the same things that are in the box, just like this. And it has diagrams of the machine. But what you'll notice when you open your manual is that the manual is printed with the Silhouette software V3 version of the software. Now, it's still a good idea to take a look at this because it'll give you some helpful tips on how to use the Curio itself, but know that the software that you're seeing on this screen is going to look a little different if you're on the version 4 of the software. I highly recommend the version 4 of the software. Now, we're going to discuss how this is different. So, the Curio works off of this base. This is how it can accommodate a thicker material setting than the Cameo. The Curio can accommodate up to a 5mm thickness in materials, while the Cameo can only fit 2mm underneath the rollers. So, you have these little plastic snaps on the sides, and that is what these plastic snaps, these are extras that come with it just in case one of them would break. I've not yet had one of them break, but it can happen, especially if you're not paying attention and have these locked down when you put it through the machine. Okay, so we have our base. Your Curio base has an arrow at the top. This is always the top of the mat that gets loaded into the machine. Now, the way this works is that you have these different platforms, and what you will see on your, when you look at it, you're not going to be able to see this on the camera, but on your Curio platforms is an embossed number. You have a 2, a 2, a 1, and then you have these 2 mats, which are both 1s, and they show that on the side. These are your platforms that you're going to use to stack on top of each other, on top of the base, and then you're going to use one of these 2 mats depending on what you're doing. So with this one is your embossing mat. So if you're trying to emboss on paper or cardstock, or I use this when I'm using my etching on metal sheets, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Those are about the only things that I've used my embossing mat for. This one is your cutting mat. It's just like the same cutting mat as a Silhouette Cameo. It has a blue protective cover on it. And you're going to gently remove that blue protective cover. And underneath is your sticky mat. This is your cutting mat. So the first thing I do when I open a new cutting mat is I de-stick it a little bit. Make sure that your t-shirt or with a clean cotton shirt, and you de-stick it. This just helps get it so it'll release the materials a little bit easier. The mat is super sticky when you first get it. Anytime you're done with the mat, you want to cover it back up. Now, what I'll point out is that the grid on your cutting mat in your software lines up exactly with the grid on your Curio mat, which means when you are in the middle of a project, you could pause the machine, you could unload the base, and you could reload the base after you've checked it and unpause it, and it will return to the exact same spot on the mat where it was working if you have loaded the base properly. If you have not loaded the base properly, then it may not go to the exact same spot. So we're going to go ahead and cover this. Keeping your mat covered. It does have two sides to this sticky. The shiny side is your non-stick. That's the side you want down onto your sticky mat. And then you have a matte finish side, a duller side, that is the top. You want to keep your mat covered as much as possible. I cover mine whenever I take it out of the machine because I have kids and I have cats, and just any kind of debris is going to lessen the lifespan of your cutting mat. Since this works off of a platform system, the way it works to accommodate the thicker materials is anytime you are using a material less than 1 millimeter, you are going to have a total of 6 when you do your platforms. So you're adding up the numbers on the side of your platform. So if you're cutting cardstock, adhesive vinyl, heat transfer vinyl, anything that's really thin and under 1 millimeter, you're going to stack a 2, a 2, a 1, and your cutting mat, which is a 1. So that it adds up to a total of a 6. If you do not have that many platforms, then you're going to experience cutting issues, and it can range from either not cutting at all because the blade is not touching the material, or it can add extra force and it will tear up your materials. So say we're going to cut some cardstock. I'm going to stack my plates, a 2, a 2, a 1, and a 1. Total of 6. You line it up. There's little holes on there that match up with the pegs that are on your cutting mat, cutting on your base. You're going to line those up, open up the clips, line that up, and then lock the clips. You want to make sure those clips are locked, or they can get stuck in the machine when you turn it on. So I'm going to plug in the Curio. On the right hand side, you have 3 buttons. We're going to work from front to back. The front is your pause button. The middle button is your load and unload button. The back button is your on and off switch. So we're going to turn that on. You're going to hear the machine adjust. And what you heard is the blade housing moving. I will say, when you first unbox your Curio and you want the software to recognize it, you will need to plug it into your computer. You will need to turn it on, and then you may need to click on the Send tab in order for it to recognize it. The other thing you may need to do is load the base. At that point, to get it to recognize the Curio, you do not have to have the base set up, but do close the locking clips on it. It just needs to be able to sync in order for it to recognize the Curio machine has been plugged in. So to do that, you're going to load the arrow into the Curio. Gently, it fits inside these white rollers. You want it to roll with no hindrance at all. If you cannot push gently and get it to roll, there's something wrong. Don't force it. You do not want to force the mat in or out of this machine. You're going to notice on the base that there are notches on the right, on either side. These notches are built into the base. On the back of your base, this black square is what the Curio recognizes for the mat and how it can load the mat correctly every single time. This black square has to go past that black square in order for it to load to the exact orientation every single time. So the way you do that is you have these little notches on the side of your base. You're going to gently push your base into your machine, and the notch is right here. You want to make sure that this notch is loaded past the front of your machine. You can push it in all the way. I don't think that's necessary. It will stop on the back side. I load mine in so my notch is just between the two white rollers. And you can see that there's a notch on either side. It's between the two white rollers. The main thing you have to know is that it needs to go past the front of the machine in order for that black square to go past the black square on the Curio. When you do that, then you can go ahead and hit, you're gonna see that the power button is blinking. On your Silhouette software, it is also going to say syncing, and it will say syncing until you actually load the base and hit the load button here. When that Curio is recognized, then it will say ready. Now, you do not have to have the base in after the machine has already been recognized by your software. You have to have the base in the very first time for your software to pick up the Curio, but after that you can design in it and you can do everything in it before you load all the materials and put the base in. So this will flash until we hit the load button. Remember, keep that notch. You want to pass the front of the machine, so it's inside the machine. You're going to hit this double arrow button, which is your load and unload button. And then you will notice that the Curio orientates the tool 1, which is the red circle, to the top left corner of the Curio cutting mat. If I put my blade in here, it comes with a ratchet blade. You want the fin of this ratchet blade at the 6 o'clock position. So right in the front, 6 o'clock position, you turn. I hold mine down. You do not want a gap between the lip of the blade and the blade housing, and you're going to turn the front to lock the blade in. Now you'll notice on your machine, once you've hit it, if you have loaded that base properly, it's going to orientate itself to the top left corner of the Silhouette cutting mat every single time. If you do not load it properly, I'm going to go ahead and unload this. This is showing you what not to do. So I'm going to hit the unload button. Now it will freely move. I'm going to unload it. If I load it just like this, my notch is not where it should be, and I go to hit the load button, it will load it, but it is not in the correct position. So this is what not to do. So you want to push the base into the machine so the notch is past the front of the machine. The notch is right here on my base. Then you can hit the load, unload button on the right-hand side, and it's going to orientate the blade to the top left corner every single time. So once it is loaded, you're going to notice that you cannot move this base. You do not want to force it in and out at any time. You could break something or alter something in the mechanics of the machine if you're trying to force your base in and out. So you want to make sure when you're going to unload it, you're going to hit the double arrow on the right hand side. Then you should notice that your base is free to move. It unlocks these rollers and allows it to be able to be moved in and out. I use this if I'm trying to emboss on paper or if I'm etching on the Silhouette metal etching sheets. It does have a protective cover. It is a clear cover, and you want to be very careful. There's a little blue tab on the top. You want to be careful when you're removing this. What you'll notice underneath it is you have what is called an embossing mat. This is kind of sticky, but it's not really sticky. It is designed, it will hold your paper down, but with the Silhouette metal etching sheets, it works off of a vacuum. So once you've placed that metal etching sheet down there, it kind of vacuum seals it to that embossing mat. What I recommend with both of these mats is after you're done, you want to unload it from the machine, take this off, and you want to flip it over. I take my protective cover and I flip it over on top of that so it's not getting debris on it. And then you want to carefully just roll your mat back so it will release those materials. And that's how you can get that vacuum seal to release off of it. With the cutting mat, it works the same way. This will help with releasing your paper and prevent curling as well. And it'll work with both the Curio and the Cameo mats. With this Curio embossing mat, you want to be very, very careful with it. The squishy embossing mat part of it can be delicate, so if you're using double-sided tape or you put contact paper on it, it's going to rip that mat. It's just a sponge-like mat on top of that. Like I said, for most things, I use the Silhouette cutting mat. So I use this cutting mat for almost all things, and most of the things that I do is acrylic etching. I use this if I'm doing the Silhouette metal etching sheets. With a thicker material, like the acrylic blank, or even a thin piece of wood, a wood ornament, a wood disc, then you can remove platforms in order to account for the thickness. Now, each blank is gonna vary, so I get mine at Craft Chameleon, and I know they're at 3 millimeters. So I have my own settings for that. When you're using a thinner piece, the best way to know is you're gonna measure each time. So if it's under 1 millimeter, you're still gonna use a stack of a 6. If it's over 1 millimeter, then you're going to adjust the platforms for that thickness. The numbers on the side match up to the millimeters. So you have, for thin materials, you have a total of 6 in there for it to meet the blade. If I'm using a thicker material such as the acrylic, then I can take out a 2 millimeter, for instance, and I can add my blank on top of that. Depending on the thickness, you're going to add up the numbers. You want a total of a 6 for almost all materials. Now, what I will say is that it's not always the same because not every single blank is made the same. So what I get from Craft Chameleon may be different if you purchased it from a different company. So the settings that I use for the Craft Chameleon acrylics. The settings that I've been testing for a wood blank, I had to test, measure this first, then put it on a stack of my bases, and then test that to see if it would work right. So when you get your Curio out of the box, if you've gotten a basic package, what you're going to find is that it is ready to go with your ratchet blade, your cutting blade, and you have 2 embossing tips. These are designed to emboss on paper. One is a fine and one is a wide embossing, and you can get started with that. The Curio will cut the same materials that a Cameo will, but it is limited by the size of the cutting mat. So you either have the small size cutting mat that comes with every Curio, or if you get the larger base, you have an 8.5 by 12-inch cutting mat. It has to have the base with it loaded. It does not cut without the base. It does not cut matless. And you cannot trick the machine by loading a large cutting mat on top of a small base, because it recognizes it by that square. So it recognizes that this is a small Curio base. As a beginner, what I would recommend is 2 additional purchases. If you want to try etching, and this is what I really love to do on the Curio, and this is what I would recommend. So your Silhouette metal etching sheets. You get 3 different colors, and they are double-sided. You will also need an etching tool, and I recommend the Silhouette etching tool. I have tried other tools. This one is the one that gives me the best results. Yes, it eventually dulls because it is a metal blade. It's a metal tip. It's going to dull if you're etching on metal or if you're etching on acrylic. It's just like a knife. It's going to dull. So these are additional purchases unless they came in your bundle, but if you want to get into the etching part of it, this is what I would recommend. So when you start, you're going to get your metal etching sheet. and your embossing mat. You're going to carefully take the protective cover off the embossing mat. And what you'll notice is that there's no grid on here. It's perfectly white, so you cannot see the grid that lines up with your cutting mat on your virtual screen. There are 2 arrows in the top left corner. You're going to place, and I'm going to set this on the table, you're going to place your metal etching sheet where those 2 arrows meet, and you're going to press down. And then if you get it wrong, or how you don't want it, you're just going to flip that mat over, and you're going to release it, and you're going to try again. You're going to press it down, and then it's going to be set on your mat. So you're lining up the corner, top left corner of the metal etching sheet where these 2 arrows meet. Then you're going to stack all of your platforms onto your base. You're going to lock all of the locking clips in place and make sure that they're secure. You have your Silhouette etching tool. You're going to open that up. And it does not have a fin on it. It's not directional. It's just a little tiny metal tip. I'm going to take it out, my blade out. I'm going to put my etching tool in. The lip of the blade still needs to be down, flush with the housing, and you're going to lock that into place. Next, I'm going to take my base, arrow at the top, and I'm going to load it into the machine gently. Push it all the way in so the notch on my base is past the front of the machine, and I'm going to hit the load button. And then what I would suggest is you open up your emboss panel, you place a small design on your screen with your Curio mat, and you start etching with small fills. You create small, don't do the 5x7, that's what I did when I first started, and I messed up my first one because I didn't have the information out there and I was just trying to see how it would go. So I recommend small ones. These are not that expensive, and it is a great way to test on. They are double-sided, so when you fill one side, you can just flip it over and start etching on the other side. The way you're going to learn what works for you and what works for each design is by testing. And I know that may not be what you want to hear, but it is the best way. So each material you use is going to be a little bit different. I recommend getting these metal etching sheets if etching is what you want to do. Use the Silhouette etching tool, open that emboss panel, and just play with it. If you have any questions, please let me know. SilhouetteSecrets.com or find me on my Facebook page at Silhouette Secrets Plus. Have a great day. I hope this helps you. Enjoy that Curio. It's one of my favorite machines. Thank you.